Hello and welcome to your midweek edition of the CCN podcast. Today is Wednesday, May 27th, 2015, and I'm your host, Paul Medor. The price of Bitcoin is trending around $235, with a 24-hour high of roughly $237. However, these figures are provided by Bitstamp and do not necessarily represent the entire market. On today's show, we have an interview with John O'Mara, an early Bitcoin adopter and miner who developed and supported the MacMiner project for years. MacMiner was a graphical user interface for mining software. CCN received word that O'Mara had decided to discontinue that project, and so we decided to get him on the line for an interview about that decision. But first, some of the week's news. Remember, for the latest Bitcoin news, always check out Crypto Coins News, ccn.la. Convicted Silk Road mastermind Ross Ulbricht has made a final plea to federal judge Catherine Forrest in hopes that she will not give him life imprisonment for being the organizer of perhaps the most financially successful digital drug bazaar in history. In a letter sent to her recently, Ulbricht said, quote, "I created the Silk Road because I thought the idea for the website itself had value, and that bringing Silk Road into being was the right thing to do. I believed at the time that people should have the right to buy and sell whatever they wanted so long as they weren't hurting anyone else. However, I've learned since then that taking immediate actions on one's beliefs without taking the necessary time to really think them through can have disastrous consequences. Silk Road was supposed to be about giving people the freedom to make their choices. What it turned into was, in part, a convenient way for people to satisfy their drug addictions. While I still don't think that the people should be denied the right to make this decision for themselves, I never sought to create a site that would provide another avenue for people to feed their addictions. Had I been more mature, or more patient, or even more worldly then, I would have done things differently. As I see it, a life sentence is more similar to a death sentence. If I do make it out of prison, decades from now, I won't be the same man, and the world won't be the same place. I certainly won't be the rebellious risk-taker I was when I created Silk Road. Even now I understand what a terrible mistake I made. Please leave a small light at the end of the tunnel. An excuse to stay healthy, an excuse to dream of better days ahead, and a chance to redeem myself in the free world before I meet my maker." This was of course a selected snippet of the letter, but you can find the rest of it via the link on the episode page at ccn.la. For anyone still wondering whether Ross Ulbricht was Dread Private Roberts, it seems clear that he was, given the number of times he confesses in even this short excerpt. CCN covered this story extensively over the last several months because, as you know, the currency used on the Silk Road darknet market, among others, was Bitcoin, a choice Ulbricht made for many reasons. There are even some people, such as Nathaniel Popper, who say that Silk Road was the first testbed for the use of Bitcoin as a real currency, and its first successful use case at that. A survey is presently being conducted about the block size limit. While it is not being done scientifically, that is, it is being done via a Google Docs form, thus far more than 90% of participants have said that it should be increased. Perhaps the Bitcoin Foundation should conduct a more scientifically sound survey to find out the community's feelings on this issue. To answer this survey, which can total up to just 4 questions, check out the episode page. On a similar note, Gavin Andreessen is expressing some regret about raising the issue in the manner he has. However, in a recent blog post entitled Analysis Paralysis, also linked from the episode page, he says, quote, "I'm convinced that uncertainty over when or if this will be resolved is harming Bitcoin. If somebody can point me at a successful software technology that went through years and years of debate and research and was not deployed until it was perfect, I'd change my mind. The example that immediately comes to my mind is Project Xanadu versus the Internet. Project Xanadu, of course, is the first attempt at the Internet. It was first officially released 38 years after its inception in 1998, long after the World Wide Web and various protocols which support it had been in wide use. What Gavin is saying is that Xanadu may never see mass adoption, despite releasing Open Xanadu in 2014 and whatever else it has done, because its developers were pushing too hard for perfection, failed to get to marketing. The Bitcoin exchange OKCoin is presently at war with Roger Ver, in case you'd missed it. Ver says they owe him a substantial amount of money in regards to fees never paid for Bitcoin.com, and for this reason he suspects they may be insolvent. Ver also insists that he did not sign a contract which absolved OKCoin of the responsibility to pay him the money they owe him, and that they in fact forged his signature. At present, Bitcoin.com is redirecting to blockchain.info. In a recent interview with CCN, Ver, an early adopter, Bitcoin millionaire, and the space's premier investor, said, quote, "The CEO of OKCoin forged a contract and then forged my name onto it. PGP cryptographic signatures have proven it to be a forgery and for him to be a liar beyond any doubt. The only reason I can think of for him to go to such extremes is to get out of a $10,000 a month payment is if his company is already insolvent and doesn't have the money. I really think we should demand a full proof of reserves audit of OKCoin at this point." Now, with that out of the way, let's get to our interview with John O'Mara, also known as Fabulous Panda, which was conducted on Monday. On the line here with John O'Mara, also known as Fabulous Panda, developer of MacMiner for a few years, I guess. Hi, John. How are you doing?
Hi, Paul. I'm pretty good. Thanks. Glad to be on the line with you.
So, when did you start the MacMiner project?
MacMiner itself was started in 2013, around the time of one of the first massive rallies, but I'd been involved in Bitcoin for 2 years prior to that and had a few other projects not related to mining.
Tell me about your other involvement in the community that came prior to, but were you mining or?
Yes.
You were mining before you started MacMiner.
For a couple of years before I started MacMiner, yeah. Because I've been a technical professional for a long time, I found out about it in 2011. Macs are quite inefficient at GPU mining, but that's what I used for a while.
So I think you said you had a lot of Macs laying around.
Well, I managed a lot, but I had maybe 4 or 5 for my personal use, and those were what I mined with initially.
And so at that time, CPU mining was still possible?
Possible, but I didn't bother. By that point, I was only GPU mining. So with 5 Macs, not particularly powerful ones, I managed to amass around 100 Bitcoins, which I spent mostly on coffee.
With who? With BitBrew?
With BitBrew, who you probably shouldn't order from now.
Where did you hear about Bitcoin? See, I remember very briefly at some point in 2010, I think I saw a Slashdot post about it, and I have this distinct memory that, I saw this thing about Bitcoin and I read up a little bit about it, but I was just like, oh, that's cool. We have geek money now. That was it for like years. That was my only thought about it. Anyway, so you first heard about Bitcoin from where?
Yeah, I actually remembered. There's I'm not even sure I should publicize the URL of it, but there's a very small social website. You can see 10 posts on a page at any one time. It's linked to an anime. But someone there posted about Bitcoin, probably early 2011, and I looked it up. So that was how I first found out about it. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are attracted by the potential of it in terms of both profit and freedom from bank and government control. So those were my primary reasons for getting involved in the first place. Also, just the fact that I love learning about new technology.
Right. I mean, I think a huge chunk of the community are, we're not otherwise financial people. We're more technical people.
Exactly.
We have a love of technology, and I mean, the idea of being able to use money online without PayPal That's just a beautiful idea. So MacMiner itself, what was the advantage? So I mean, let me back up a little for the listeners. MacMiner was a GUI, or graphical user interface, mining software that made it easy for Mac users to mine cryptocurrencies. Of course, first just Bitcoin, and let me know if I go off course here, John. But just Bitcoin at first, and then others as well. It made it incredibly easy for them to just kind of click it and go. You launched it in 2013. How big of a user base do you think you
Well,
have?
I, in anticipation, opened up my Google Analytics, which might not perhaps fit the Bitcoin user base, but that's what I use. And at the beginning of 2014, when we had the biggest spike Bitcoin saw, I was getting 2,000 users a day, unique visitors on the MacMiner website. I know I had at one point coming up to 100,000 downloads a month. So it was a significant user base.
I've never I've mined, but I've never used a graphical program. So I assume it just, did you write it in Qt? How did you, or
Oh, no,
Cocoa, I guess?
so I was getting away from Qt because before MacMiner, there was something commonly referred to as GUI miner, which is written in Python. And just before writing MacMiner, I wrapped that in a Mac app so that you could just double click it and run it, because Python isn't so integrated with Mac OS. And after a couple of months of that, I thought, well, it would be a lot nicer to have a native Mac app for this, and I wrote MacMiner in Objective-C, but it included initially PocLBM as the backend, which was still Python, and went on to include other backends like BFG miner, CG miner, which are written in C for the most part.
So you didn't use the Cocoa framework for anything, I guess. That's the Mac thing, isn't it?
It is a Mac thing, and I guess I used it indirectly. But I was programming in Objective-C. I wasn't using many of the frameworks included in macOS.
Okay, and so just, I guess what my real question was is that this GUI basically just was buttons that would run the commands for the user without the user having to type them in.
Yeah, so basically you'd open it up. It would at first just ask you for your pool information, and you would have a very small window which would have a start button, a log, and a hash rate display, and accepted, rejected shares.
How much use did you get out of your mining software? You said you spent most of your Bitcoin before it was really worth much, but how much mining did you do? Did you mine 24 hours a day for a long time, or?
I've been mining, except for the downtimes, for since 2011, 24 hours a day. But by the time I'd released MacMiner, it wasn't so easy to acquire Bitcoins without massive power.
Okay, right. Actually, the guy who wrote BFG Miner, Luke Dash Jr., yeah, and he mined a lot of Bitcoin. He mined a lot of Bitcoin with the LGS pool. So I find it interesting that you developed this pretty slick mining software for Mac users, but probably by the time it was most profitable for them to be using it, you yourself were not mining it so much anymore.
Well, I should rephrase that. It was more that GPU mining had become unprofitable, and MacMiner, because it used BFG miner, etc., it supported ASICs at the same rate that the backends did. I did switch from GPU mining. I was lucky enough to be early enough in the Butterfly Labs order queues to actually profit very slightly from a couple of small orders.
So you bought some ASICs and you made some money with those, and then I guess you sold the ASICs like happens to everybody.
No, they just broke.
Oh, you just ran them dead. The reason we're talking, to the detriment of any MacMiner dedicated users that may be listening, is that you have decided to discontinue your development of MacMiner.
That's right.
What's led up to this decision? I guess you figure that most people who are now running mining rigs are controlling it with Raspberry Pis or Beagles or stuff like that.
Yeah, generally one of those two running Linux, and they're still usually running CG Miner or BFG Miner on their own. And MacMiner was updated to monitor their APIs, but the device manufacturers, I'm not sure even one of them included the temperature information in that. And usually it required some manual setup for the API to be accessible from those standalone miners. So MacMiner was, and I used it for monitoring IP-based miners, KNC, for instance. That support was never full enough to include control for the IP miners. It only ever included support for the USB attached miners. And because the code is also bundled together, it would be better off to write a monitoring app from scratch. Because it's becoming so much less of a hobby and more of an industry, I'm not sure there's much of a market for that.
Not unless you could somehow market it to the mining companies themselves, I guess, huh?
Yeah, and there's someone called Nate Wools who makes something called Multi-Miner and Mobile Miner, which runs across a lot of systems, and I think he would be in a much better place to work professionally with those people.
Do you think that it's possible for a home miner with, say, less than $10,000 to really enter the market and turn out any kind of profit?
As it stands right now, at the beginning of 2014, when the price reached about $1,000 for a Bitcoin, so many people invested in ASIC that since then it's been very hard for anyone, even on an industrial scale, to make profit unless you're stealing electricity. I think for there to be a future for hobbyist or small-scale mining, first, the price needs to rise a great deal, and people need to get a lot more realistic about the possibility of losses.
You're discontinuing MacMiner basically because it serves no purpose as far as you can see at this point.
Well, the miner monitoring possibly, but it was never developed to the extent that it would be truly useful.
And so it is open source, however.
It's on GitHub, and I hope that people will continue to develop it or fork it for specific currencies. But because there are so many different backends for every different altcoin and the algorithms change on a regular basis, it's a huge amount of work to try and support many of them. I was still supporting, Vertcoin, Maxcoin, even PandaCoin, coins that disappeared and were scams. And my perspective around that time, which leads me to say, can we avoid an ASIC-dominated industry, is not only Bitcoin, but Litecoin as well, seems to be going the same way. Another factor in, I guess, why I'm killing not Bitcoin, I can't kill Bitcoin, MacMiner is obviously there is a certain aspect of freedom to it, which is a good and a bad thing. We've talked about the darknet, which has good and bad uses. I mean, I'm sure Edward Snowden appreciates it, and I appreciate him. But even when you're on sites like eBay trying to sell your old miners, I've had contact from scary people. I don't even want to go into details about the kind of things that they say they use. Well, no, I'll say that they use it to buy guns in the UK. And despite what Americans think, you can buy guns here with a license, but you shouldn't be able to get them anonymously off the internet. So I guess I'm a little concerned about the ethical.
Well, what you're saying that the people that you've encountered around Bitcoin mining haven't been quite the caliber of people you'd like to encounter.
I don't want to make that generalization, because I think especially in the early days it was a very altruistic movement. I just think that the nature of it means that a lot of dangerous people are involved.
What's next for John O'Mara? What are you going to do now?
Well, I've been posting around to see whether there would be any interest in a miner monitoring application. I'm contemplating and asking others whether there might be more forward-looking Mac, iOS, or web-based project that would benefit the community. But for the time being, I'm focused on developing other apps unrelated, unfortunately. The only other thing I would like to close with, to put a more positive spin on things, is that one of the side projects I worked on was called Give a Bit, which never took off at all. fabulouspanda.co.uk/giveabit, and I was attempting to increase the charitable sector of the Bitcoin society. So, there is hope in there, and I think we're in a transitionary period, and there's just a lot up in the air at the moment. So I'm very interested to see where we'll be in a year's time.
As far as price-wise, or as far as adoption-wise?
Neither, as far as the state of the technology, because it started off obviously very technical, and we're mid-transition to a place where...
you want something so easy a Mac user can use it.
Exactly, without having to mine, without having to run Bitcoin QT or a confusing wallet, to be able to log on to something like PayPal, but without so much regulation.
Maybe that's what you should be doing, is the Mac wallet. Just call it that.
There are a few.
Call it Steve Wallet. Well, thank you for your time this morning, John. Enjoy your day.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Paul, and I hope you enjoy yours.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the CCN podcast. Please write in with any ideas, suggestions, comments, guests you'd like to have me interview, or anything else, really. I'd love to hear from you. You can write me directly at paul.madore, M-A-D-O-R-E, at cryptocoinsnews.com. Please feel free to download, like, and share this podcast in any way you feel, and never be shy about letting me know how I'm doing. I'm Paul Madore, signing off for Crypto Coins News. Visit us at ccn.la and visit me at phm.link.